Picture this. It's 1987. You've driven out to the drag strip on a Saturday morning, coffee in hand, ready to watch the best funny cars in the country do what they do best. But when Kenny Bernstein rolls that Budweiser King car into the staging lanes, something is wrong, or at least it looks wrong. Real wrong. The guys standing next to you start grumbling. Other team owners are furious. Even the NHRA officials who had signed off on this car, the same guys who said, yes, it's legal, are now huddled in the corner, looking like they made a terrible mistake. Because what just pulled up to that drag strip didn't look like any funny car anyone had ever seen before. It didn't really look like a Buick either. Fans that day started calling it one thing the Batmobile. And here's the thing that made everyone so mad: it was completely 100% legal. And there was absolutely nothing anybody could do to stop it. Today, we're going to tell you the full story of the most controversial car in NHRA funny car history. How it was built, how it was approved, how it dominated an entire season, and why, even nearly 40 years later, drag racing fans still argue about it. Stay with us, because this story has everything genius engineering, a rulebook loophole, $300,000, and one of the greatest seasons any funny car has ever had. Let's go. Now, before we get into the Batmobile, you have to understand who Kenny Bernstein was, because this story only makes sense when you know the man behind it. Kenny Bernstein was born September 6, 1944, in Lubbock, Texas. And from a young age, that boy had gasoline in his blood. His first hot rod was a 1930 Ford Model A that he bought with money he earned working weekends and holidays. He learned to drive on his grandparents' farm in Farwell, Texas, in a 1952 Ford pickup truck. Now, when Kenny was in college at Arlington State studying business administration, he made a decision that most fathers would not have been happy about. He quit school, not to get a regular job. He quit school to become a drag racer. Problem was, he didn't have money to race. So what did this future champion do? He became a traveling salesman selling a clothing line for teenage girls. He drove all across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee in a Cadillac, selling clothes by day and dreaming about racing by night. He was in and out of racing through the late 1960s and early 1970s. He actually made it to the funny car final at the 1973 NHRA Winter Nationals, a promising run, but then money ran out. So Kenny Bernstein did what smart men do. He pivoted. He opened a restaurant. And not just any restaurant, a chain called the Chelsea Street Pubs. By the late 1970s, that chain had restaurants in 5 states and employed 2,700 people. Kenny Bernstein, the drag racer, had become Kenny Bernstein, the successful businessman. But that fire for racing never went out. And in 1978, when a buddy asked him to drive a funny car at the NHRA US Nationals, Kenny said yes. And just like that, he was hooked all over again. In 1979, with his own Chelsea King funny car named after his restaurants, Kenny won his first national event, the NHRA Cajun Nationals. That same year, he also won the IHRA Funny Car Championship. And then came the deal that would change everything. He convinced Budweiser to sponsor his team. That $80,000 deal, pieced together from Budweiser wholesalers across the country, launched one of the longest and most successful sponsor-driver partnerships in motorsports history. 30 years, Budweiser and Kenny Bernstein. By 1985, Kenny won his first NHRA Funny Car Championship. Then again in 1986. He was already one of the best in the business. His Budweiser King car was one of the most recognized machines on any drag strip in America. But Kenny Bernstein didn't just want to win, and neither did his crew chief. The genius meet Dale Armstrong, the man behind the plan. If Kenny Bernstein was the money and the marketing, Dale Armstrong was the brain. And what a brain it was. Dale Armstrong was a Canadian, quiet, methodical, and decades ahead of everybody else in how he thought about drag racing. Before he became a crew chief, he was a racer himself. He won 12 NHRA national event victories in altereds and funny cars. He understood these machines from the inside out. Kenny once said that Dale explained their working relationship perfectly. Dale told him, "Kenny, you go out and find the money, and I spent it." Kenny laughed when he told that story, but both of them knew it worked. When Dale joined the Budweiser King team as crew chief in 1982, he brought something to drag racing that almost nobody was doing at the time. He was among the very first to use wind tunnel testing for straight-line racing applications. Not road racing, not oval racing, drag racing. He went into wind tunnels and studied aerodynamics the same way aerospace engineers did. He used equipment built to test airplane engines to dyno test nitro motors. Think about that for a second. In the early 1980s, most funny car teams were focused on horsepower, nitro tune, clutch settings. But Dale Armstrong was thinking about airflow over the body, about how the shape of the car affected elapsed times. He developed a 2-speed blower transmission. He worked on 24-plug cylinder heads with triple magnetos. He invented stuff that nobody else in drag racing had even thought about yet. And a lot of it got banned because once NHRA figured out what he was doing, they had to write new rules just to stop him. One writer said it best: if this guy ever teamed up with a smart millionaire who had real money, the sport might never be the same. Well, he found that millionaire. His name was Kenny Bernstein. Going into 1987, Dale Armstrong had his biggest idea yet. One day, Dale walked into Kenny's office with an idea. He said he wanted to build a completely custom funny car body from scratch, not based on any existing template, designed specifically for aerodynamic efficiency, and it was going to look loosely like a Buick LeSabre. Kenny's response was simple. "A Buick?" Dale said, "Trust me." And then he told Kenny the price tag, $300,000, in 1987 money. Pause for effect here. Kenny later said he nearly fell out of his chair. But here's what Kenny understood: Dale Armstrong didn't spend money frivolously. If Dale said this was worth $300,000, it was worth $300,000. So they green-lit the project, and Dale went to work. He didn't go to the usual funny car bodybuilders. Instead, he hired the Aravet Brothers engineers who specialized in land speed racing. Guys who thought about aerodynamics the way aerospace designers did. Guys who had never built a funny car before, and that was exactly the point. Dale spent weeks in wind tunnels. He tested shapes. He refined the contours. He calculated how air would flow over every surface at 270 miles per hour. While other teams were building the same bodies they'd been building for years, Armstrong was designing something that had never existed before. The body they came up with was radical. It was low. It was smooth. The lines were unlike anything in funny car racing. The windshield rake was extreme. The overall shape was something between a production car and a prototype racing machine. When Kenny first saw it fully assembled in the shop, even he had doubts. Kenny recalled looking at it and thinking, "Dale, what have you done? My goodness, there's no way that thing is going to be approved." And Dale just looked at him and said, "There are no rules on any of it." He was right. The NHRA rulebook at the time was vague on body dimensions. It said funny car bodies needed to be within a certain percentage of the factory vehicle they represented. But within a certain percentage left a lot of room if you were smart enough and creative enough to use it. Now came the really interesting part. They had to get NHRA to approve it. The trick how they fooled the rulebook now, this is the part of the story where things get really interesting, because it wasn't just about building a radical car. It was about getting that radical car approved. And Dale Armstrong, that quiet, methodical Canadian genius, had thought about that problem just as carefully as he'd thought about the aerodynamics. You have to remember something about the NHRA inspection process back in 1987. It was not what it is today. There were no computer modeling systems, no digital measurement tools. The inspectors came into your shop. They walked around your car with their own eyes, and they made a judgment call based on what the rulebook said. And the rulebook said that a funny car body had to be within a certain percentage of the factory vehicle it was supposed to represent. That's it, within a certain percentage. A rule written loosely enough that a creative enough man, a man who had spent weeks in wind, tunnels, and months designing something no one had ever built, could walk right through it. If he was smart about how he showed it, when NHRA officials came to inspect the car, Dallas Gardner, Steve Gibbs, and Graham Light walked into that shop, Dale Armstrong made sure they saw it at a very specific moment in its build. The body was sitting in gel coat primer, completely solid, no windows cut out yet. No windshield opening, no side glass openings, just a smooth, sealed, basic shape sitting there under the shop lights. And without those cutouts, without those openings, the body looked far less radical than it actually was. The extreme windshield angle was hidden. The aggressive overall profile was softened. What those inspectors saw was an unusual shape, yes, but not an obviously illegal one. The inspectors walked around it. They looked at it from every angle. They huddled in corners and whispered to each other. Kenny was watching all of this from across the shop, trying to look calm. $300,000 was sitting right there on that stand. And then Dallas Gardner came over and delivered the line that Kenny Bernstein still remembers decades later. "Kenny, we're going to go to lunch and think about this a minute. Pause here full 2 seconds, then continue. Kenny looked over at Dale. And all he could think was, I sure hope we get to run it. An hour or so later felt like a lot longer to Kenny. Those officials came back, and they approved it, stamped it legal, cleared it for competition, gave the Budweiser King team the green light to put that body on the track in 1987. Let that moment breathe. Do not rush past it. What they approved was a body and primer with no windows cut. What they had not seen, what they literally could not see standing in that shop that day, was what that car was going to look like when the windows got cut out, when the windshield opening was trimmed in, when the fiberglass got sanded, painted Budweiser red, and rolled up to a staging lane with 15,000 people in the grandstands. Because when Kenny Bernstein debuted that car at the Super Bowl of drag racing in Phoenix early in the 1987 season, there was a moment, one specific moment, when other drivers, crew chiefs, team owners, and fans all saw the real Batmobile for the very first time. The windows were cut. The paint was on, the car was alive, and it looked like nothing anyone had ever seen at an NHRA national event. It was low. It was sleek. The windshield raked back at an angle that seemed almost too aggressive for a production-based car. The sides were smooth in a way that real street cars simply weren't. The whole profile had this otherworldly, aeronautical look to it, like someone had crossed a Buick with a jet aircraft and called it a funny car, which, in a way, was exactly what Dale Armstrong had done. Other team owners went to NHRA officials immediately. That doesn't look anything like a Buick LeSabre. You cannot let that car run. This isn't what a funny car is supposed to be. The complaints were loud. They were from serious, respected people in the sport. This wasn't just jealousy. These were legitimate competitors who felt they had been blindsided by something that shouldn't have been allowed through the front gate. And the fans in the grandstands? Split right down the middle. Half of them were booing, genuinely booing. Some of those people had driven hours to come to the track and watch funny cars that looked like real American cars going 270 miles per hour, and what they got instead looked like something out of a science fiction movie. That wasn't what they paid to see, and they weren't quiet about it. The other half couldn't take their eyes off it, because whatever you thought about the rules, whatever you thought about whether it was fair, that car was stunning, was unlike anything in the sport. You couldn't stop looking at it. NHRA officials found themselves in one of the most uncomfortable positions an organization can be in. Their own tech inspectors had stamped that car legal. Their own signatures were on the approval. To ban it now mid-season, after races had already been run, would mean publicly admitting that they had been outmaneuvered, that a crew chief and a car owner had shown them a body in a condition specifically designed to mask how radical it truly was. So they made the only decision they could make, and still save face. They called Kenny Bernstein in and gave him the verdict. You can run this car for the entire 1987 season, every race, no restrictions. But the day that season ends, the day that last race is over, this body is retired. We are rewriting the rulebook before 1988. We are going to put in specific, detailed, precise body dimension requirements that will make sure nothing like this ever gets approved again. Enjoy your season, Kenny. It's the only one you're going to get with this car. Kenny Bernstein looked back at those officials, and he smiled, because one season was all he needed. One season was everything. And he and Dale Armstrong were about to prove it. Race wins, 50% plus win rate. What the Batmobile did in 1987 was not a good season. It was not a great season. It was a statement. A declaration delivered to every other team in funny car racing that said, you are not in the same conversation as us right now. You are not even close. Let's start at the very beginning. The 1987 NHRA Winter Nationals at Pomona, the season opener, the biggest stage in drag racing, packed grandstands. Everybody there to see what the new year was going to look like. Kenny Bernstein rolled that Batmobile out, put down a 5.482 elapsed time in qualifying. Good enough for the NHRA elapsed time record at the time. #1 qualifier. Before a single elimination round had even been run. During eliminations, Bernstein was barely challenged. He faced John Force in the first round, a man who would go on to win 16 Funny Car World Championships, one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever produced. Force shut off. Bernstein moved on. Second round, he faced Ed McCulloch, the ace in the Miller beer car, one of the sharpest minds and fastest cars in the field. Bernstein put him away. Semis against Dale Pulda. Done. Final round win. First race of the season. Batmobile won, rest of the world 0. And that was just race #1. The very first event of a 20-event season. Let the audience absorb that, then build again, race after race after race. The story was the same. Bernstein would go to qualifying, put down a number that nobody else in the field could touch, take the top spot, and then go through eliminations like a hot knife through butter. Teams were trying everything they could think of, adjusting their fuel systems, tweaking their clutch packs, squeezing every last hundredth of a second out of their combinations, and Bernstein kept winning anyway. Because here is what those teams did not fully understand yet, and what Dale Armstrong had understood for months before the season even started. At 250, 260, 270 miles per hour, aerodynamic drag is not a minor factor. It is one of the most powerful forces acting on that race car. The difference between a body that fights the air and a body that slips cleanly through it can be enormous in elapsed time, in speed, in consistency, run after run. While every other team at the track had a body that was essentially shaped to look like a real production car, because that's what funny cars were supposed to look like. The Batmobile was shaped to do exactly one thing: go fast. The windshield angle, the roof contours, the side profile, the way the body transitioned from front to rear, every single surface had been designed with airflow in mind. Not showroom appeal, not brand identity. Airflow. Dale Armstrong had spent weeks in the wind tunnel before that season. He had gone to people who understood aerodynamics on a level that drag racing had never seen before, and every single hour of that work showed up in the times. While other teams were fighting drag and lift and turbulence, the Budweiser King Batmobile was parting the air like it wasn't even there, like the car was on rails and the air had simply decided to step aside. By the end of the 1987 season, the numbers told the complete story. 20 events entered, 13 number one qualifying positions, 12 race wins, a victory rate of more than 50% across an entire season of professional drag racing. Those are numbers that make your jaw drop even today. Go back and look at any era of funny car racing and try to find a season-long performance like that. It is extraordinarily rare. Kenny Bernstein was crowned the 1987 NHRA Funny Car World Champion, his third straight championship, one of the most dominant title defenses the class had ever seen. The Batmobile was simultaneously the most talked about, most complained about, most feared, and most studied car in all of drag racing. Every team that had a competitive budget was trying to figure out what Armstrong had done and how they could do something similar before the rulebook changed and made it all irrelevant. Then, right on schedule, as the last event of 1987 wrapped up, the Batmobile was retired, exactly as NHRA had demanded, rolled into a trailer and put away. One legendary, controversial, history-making season, and then silence. Because sometimes the greatest things in racing only get one chapter, but what a chapter it was. Now here is the part of this story that most people skip over. And in some ways, it's the most important part of all, because what the Batmobile did in one season went far beyond winning 12 races and a championship, changed the entire trajectory of what a funny car is, not just in 1987, not just in 1988, forever. Think back to what funny cars looked like before 1987. If you were there, if you were one of the people who went to the track in the late 1960s, the 1970s, the early 1980s, you remember this. A funny car looked like a car. When a Plymouth Barracuda pulled into the staging lanes in 1971, it looked like a Barracuda. When a Chevy Vega came down the track, it looked like a Vega. When a Ford Mustang II was running in the mid-70s, you could look at that car from the grandstands and recognize it. The body shape matched something you might have seen on a street or in a showroom. That connection, that visual relationship between what was on the track and what was in your driveway, was part of what funny cars meant to the fans. That connection is exactly what the Batmobile broke. And once it was broken, once Dale Armstrong proved that a radically different body shape could deliver a measurable, repeatable, dramatic aerodynamic advantage, there was no going back. Because the sport is competitive. That is literally the whole point. If one team proves that a different shape goes faster, every other team that wants to win is going to start pushing in that same direction. NHRA rewrote the rulebook going into 1988. They put in specific, detailed body dimension requirements designed to prevent another Batmobile situation. But the concept, the idea that aerodynamics was a genuine performance weapon, not just an aesthetic consideration, that concept was now in the air. Teams and chassis builders started thinking about their bodies differently. Engineers who had never been involved in drag racing before started getting phone calls. Wind tunnel sessions became part of serious programs. The game had shifted. Watch the progression through the late 1980s and into the 1990s. Watch how the Dodge Avengers and the Pontiac Firebirds and the other funny car bodies started to evolve. The windshields got more aggressive. The flanks got smoother. The overall shapes became more aeronautical and less automotive. NHRA kept pushing back with rules adjustments, trying to maintain some visual connection to the production cars the bodies were supposed to represent. But the direction of travel had been established. The Batmobile said it. Now look at a modern funny car. They tell you it's a Chevrolet Camaro, or a Dodge Charger, or a Toyota Supra. And if you know what graphics to look for, sure, you can read the name on the side. But the actual body shape, the silhouette, the contours, the angles, does it really look like a Camaro you'd see pulling out of a dealership? Not really. The shape has been massaged and stretched and optimized so far from the factory vehicle that without the paint job and the manufacturer's logo, most casual fans wouldn't know what brand they were looking at. That is the long shadow of the Batmobile. That is the world Dale Armstrong and Kenny Bernstein made. One car, one season, 1 year on the clock before the rulebook shut it down. And the ripple effects are still visible every single time a modern funny car fires up and goes to the line. Dale Armstrong passed away on November 28, 2014. He had been battling a serious illness called sarcoidosis, and he lost that fight at the age of 73. The drag racing world lost one of its true originals that day. Man who had won championships as a driver, dominated as a crew chief, and invented things so far ahead of their time that the rulebook had to be rewritten to stop them. A 2-speed supercharger, 24 plug cylinder heads, the first extensive dyno testing of nitro engines, and of course the Batmobile. People who knew Dale Armstrong described him as quiet and meticulous, someone who thought before he spoke and meant everything he said. He was a racer's racer, someone who genuinely loved the puzzle of making a race car go faster and was always working on the next idea, even late in his life. When he passed, John Force Racing, the most successful organization in funny car history, listed him as a consultant. That tells you everything about the respect he commanded in this sport until the very end. Kenny Bernstein went on to win that 4th straight funny car championship in 1988, another title with Dale on the wrenches. Then they made the move together to Top Fuel in 1990. And then came March 20th, 1992, at Gainesville Raceway in Florida. Kenny Bernstein became the first driver in the history of motorsport to break 300 miles per hour in the standing start quarter mile. 301.70 miles per hour. A barrier that people had debated for years. Was it even physically possible? Was a human being capable of surviving that kind of acceleration and still driving the car? Kenny Bernstein answered that question on a Saturday afternoon in Florida. And Dale Armstrong was the man who built the engine that did it. Together, those two men built one of the most remarkable partnerships in the history of drag racing. Businessman and engineer, money and genius, the Bud King and the quiet Canadian. And the Batmobile was their masterpiece, the moment when everything they were capable of, everything they had learned and developed and invested in, came together in one car, for one season, and showed the world something it had never seen before. So let me ask you the question that drag racing fans have been asking since 1987. Was it cheating? The answer is no. Not technically, not by the rules that existed at that time. Every dimension, every measurement, every part of that car had been reviewed and approved by the NHRA's own officials. Not a single rule was broken. The body was legal. The car was legal. The championship was earned fair and square. Was it fair? Now that's a different question. And that's the one people still argue about. Because there's a difference between legal and fair. A loophole is technically legal. But if you find a loophole that nobody else found, that nobody else even looked for, and you exploit it for an entire season, while the rest of the field has no idea what hit them, is that fair to the other competitors? Is it fair to the fans who came to watch funny cars that look like real cars? Those are questions without clean answers. And maybe that's why people are still talking about this car almost 4 decades later. But here is what I believe. In every era of racing, in every sport, at every level there, comes a moment when somebody looks at the same set of rules that everybody else is looking at, and they see something different. They see a space, an opening, a possibility that the other competitors either didn't notice or weren't willing to pursue. And when that person has the nerve to go after that opening, to invest the money and the time and the expertise to turn a theoretical advantage into a real one that is not cheating, that is genius. Kenny Bernstein and Dale Armstrong looked at the 1987 NHRA Funny Car Rulebook, and they saw something nobody else saw. They spent $300,000 on it. They hired land speed racing engineers who had never built a funny car. They spent weeks in a wind tunnel. They showed a body in primer to the inspectors, and they kept their mouths shut about what it was going to look like when it was finished. And then they went out and dominated one of the most competitive fields in professional motorsport for an entire season. The other teams were angry. The fans were divided. The NHRA rewrote their rulebook over the winter. But when the 1987 season ended, one name was at the top of the standings, Kenny Bernstein. And the car that put him there, that one-of-a-kind, rule-bending, fan-enraging, history-making $300,000 Buick, will always be the most controversial, the most influential, and in my opinion, the most fascinating funny car body in the history of the NHRA. That is the story of the car NHRA approved, but fans wanted banned. Thank you for spending this time with us today. These stories are worth telling, and the people who made them deserve to be remembered. Now, if you thought the Batmobile story was controversial, we are just getting started. Because next week, we are going to take you back to a moment earlier in NHRA history when another driver found a completely different kind of loophole, one that had nothing to do with aerodynamics, everything to do with raw power, and created a firestorm that the sanctioning body was not prepared for at all. Same title, different car, different era. Same level of outrage from the fans who were there. You will not want to miss it. Make sure you are subscribed so that video comes straight to you when it drops. And if you enjoyed today's story, if this brought back some memories or taught you something you didn't know, hit that like button. It takes 1 second, and it means everything to a channel like this one. We will see you next week. Final 30 seconds now if you thought the Batmobile was controversial. Wait until you hear what happened just a few years earlier when another driver found a loophole in the NHRA rulebook that was even more outrageous. That story is coming up next week. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed today's video, hit that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this one to you every week. We'll see you next time.